The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had looked at the clock 20 minutes before that, unable to sleep. It was the hospice nurse. Her voice was calm the way voices get when someone has been trained to deliver bad news without crying. She said my mother had passed peacefully, about 40 minutes ago. And then she said something that didn't make sense. She said the family had already been notified. I asked her what she meant. She said the emergency contact, the primary emergency contact on file, had already called in. Had already spoken to the attending nurse at 2:15. Had already been told. I was my mother's only child. I had not called. I had not spoken to anyone. I sat in the dark of my apartment with the phone against my ear and I didn't say anything for a long moment. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My mother had been sick for almost 2 years. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed late, as it almost always is. By the time they found it, the conversation had already shifted from treatment to management. From fighting to comfort. She moved into the hospice facility in the spring. A quiet place. Clean rooms. Staff who knew her name within the first week. I visited every few days. Sometimes more. I would bring her tea in a thermos because she said theirs tasted like warm cardboard. We would watch game shows in the afternoon. She would fall asleep halfway through and I would sit there anyway, watching the light change on the wall. My mother had a sister. I'll call her my aunt, because that's what she was, technically. They had not been close for most of my life. There had been some falling out decades ago, before I was old enough to understand what adults argued about. But when my mother got sick, my aunt reappeared. She came to the hospital. She brought flowers. She cried in the hallway. My mother, who was always more generous than me, let her back in. I didn't interfere. It wasn't my place. My mother was dying and if having her sister nearby brought her any comfort, I wasn't going to be the one to take that away. But I noticed things. Small things, at first. My aunt was often there when I arrived. More often than made sense given that she lived 40 minutes away and had a job and a life of her own. She was always warm to me, always smiling. She would say things like, "She had a good morning," or "She was asking about you earlier." But sometimes my mother seemed tired in a different way after those visits. Not physically tired. Something else. Quieter than usual. Like she had been working through something difficult and hadn't finished yet. Once I arrived and my aunt was just leaving and my mother had been crying. Not from pain. My aunt said they'd been going through old photographs. Said it was emotional, that was all. My mother said the same. I didn't push. Another time, I noticed my aunt had been looking at something on my mother's bedside table. There was a small planner there, one of those compact ones, burgundy cover, the kind my mother had used for years to keep track of appointments and phone numbers and small notes to herself. My aunt had it open and when she saw me come in, she closed it and set it back down. She said she was looking for the name of my mother's pharmacist. She smiled when she said it. I smiled back. But I thought about it on the drive home. A few days later, I mentioned to my aunt that I was thinking about speaking with the hospice social worker about my mother's financial affairs, just to make sure everything was documented and organized properly. Standard things. My aunt said that was a good idea. Then she said, very casually, that she had already spoken to someone at the facility about it. That my mother had wanted her to help with some of those arrangements. That it was already being handled and I shouldn't worry. I asked my mother about it the next day. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said she didn't remember saying that. She was tired, she said. She forgot things. Maybe she had. She didn't look convinced of that herself. I didn't say anything else. I changed the subject. I poured her tea. But I kept thinking about the planner on the nightstand. About my aunt closing it when I walked in. About a phone call made at 2:15 in the morning before I had been told my mother was gone. About someone who had made themselves the primary emergency contact without me ever knowing. I started to ask myself how. And then I started to ask myself why. And then I stopped asking myself questions out loud. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. The day after the funeral, I went back to the hospice facility. Not to grieve. Not to collect anything. I went because I had a question that needed a factual answer. I spoke with the administrative coordinator, a quiet woman who had been there the entire time my mother was a patient. I asked her, as calmly as I could, who had authorized the change to the emergency contact information on my mother's file. I told her I was my mother's only child and that I had never been informed of any change. She looked at her screen for a long moment. Then she excused herself. She came back with a printed form. She set it on the counter between us. It was a contact authorization update. Standard form. Dated 6 weeks before my mother died. My mother's signature was at the bottom. I looked at it carefully. I didn't say anything. I asked if I could have a copy. She made one and handed it to me without a word. I sat in my car in the parking lot and looked at that signature for a long time. My mother had terrible arthritis in her right hand by the end. Writing was painful. She had told me that herself. Her signature in the last year of her life had become small and uncertain. Cramped. She would apologize for it when she signed birthday cards. The signature on that form was fluid. Easy. It didn't match. I took a photograph of it. Then I put the copy in my bag and drove home. I want to explain something about my mother's planner. She had kept one every year since I was a child. Same brand, same size, different color each year. Burgundy was her color for this one. She used it for everything. Doctor's appointments. Phone numbers. Reminders. Little notes to herself in the margins. After she passed, the facility gave me a box of her personal items from the room. The planner was not in the box. I asked the nurse on duty. She said a family member had collected some items separately, a day before the official checkout. I asked who. She said she didn't have that information. I went home and I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about everything I knew. The planner had phone numbers in it. Account numbers. The name of my mother's attorney. The name of her bank. Notes about her wishes, written in her own hand over the course of 2 years. And someone had taken it before I ever had the chance to see what was inside. 3 days later, I received a letter from a law office I had never heard of. It was addressed to me formally, with language I had to read twice to understand. It informed me that my mother had executed a revised will approximately 8 weeks before her death. That the revision had reduced my inheritance significantly and redirected a substantial portion of her estate, including the house she had owned for 31 years, to my aunt. I read the letter 3 times. Then I called my mother's actual attorney. The one she had used for over a decade. The one whose name I knew because she had mentioned him to me herself. He had not been involved in any revision. He had not been contacted. He had not seen my mother in over a year. He said he would look into it. He called me back within 2 hours. He said the revision had been filed through a different firm entirely. A small office. He said he had pulled the filing and something about the notarization looked irregular. He said those were his words exactly, irregular. He said I should not respond to the letter I had received. He said I should come see him. I wrote that down. Then I did something I had been thinking about for several days. I went back through every visit I could remember. I had a habit, which my mother had always found slightly amusing, of sending her a text message when I was on my way to visit. Not because she would respond, she wasn't good with her phone, but because I liked her knowing I was coming. I had done this for almost the full 2 years. I went through those messages. I cross-referenced them with the notes I kept in my own calendar. 41 visits over 22 months. On 19 of those visits, my aunt had been present when I arrived. On 7 of those visits, she had arrived shortly after me and left before I did. On 3 visits, 3 specific visits in the last 8 weeks of my mother's life, I had arrived and my mother had been noticeably different. Quieter. Slower to respond. Her words slightly soft at the edges. I checked the nursing logs. I asked for them politely, explaining I was the next of kin, which I was. On each of those 3 days, my mother had been given her scheduled medication. But on each of those 3 days, the notation in the margin of the log, a small, informal note the nurses sometimes added, said the same thing. Patient reported feeling more tired than usual. Aunt present. That meant nothing on its own. But I wrote it down anyway. Then the planner came back. Not all of it. A photograph of 2 pages, sent to me anonymously through a messaging app one barely used. No message. Just the image. The pages were from October. My mother's handwriting. Small and cramped the way it was by then. In the margin of one page, in letters she had underlined twice, she had written a single sentence. Do not let her touch the accounts. Below it, a name. My aunt's name. Below that, a phone number. The phone number belonged to my mother's attorney. The one who had already told me he hadn't been contacted in over a year. She had written it down like a reminder. Like she was afraid she would forget. Like she was afraid she would be convinced of something she didn't want to be convinced of. I sat with that photograph for a long time. I didn't cry. I had already done most of that. I thought about what I was looking at. My mother had known. On some level, in some quiet and frightened way, she had known. And she had written it down. And someone had taken the book before I could find it. But they hadn't taken it before someone else had photographed those pages. I didn't know who had sent it. I still don't. But I printed the photograph. I saved it in 4 places. I emailed it to myself and to a separate account, and I put a copy in a folder I kept locked in my car. I picked up my phone. I called my mother's attorney. I told him I had something to show him. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The attorney's name was Gerald. He had known my mother for 14 years. He had drawn up her original will. He had helped her with the deed on the house when my father died. He was in his late 60s, quiet, methodical. The kind of man who chose his words the way other people chose their steps on ice. When I sat down across from him and laid out everything I had, he didn't react dramatically. He put on his glasses. He looked at each document in order. The contact authorization form with the signature that didn't match. The nursing log notations. The letter from the other law office. The photograph of the planner pages. He looked at that last one for a long time. Then he took his glasses off and set them on the desk. He said, "This is not a small matter." I told him I knew that. He said he wanted to bring in a colleague who specialized in elder law and estate litigation. He said he also wanted me to contact the state's Adult Protective Services Division, because what I was describing, if it held together under investigation, was not just a civil matter. I asked him to explain that. He said the word quietly, without drama. Undue influence. Possibly fraud. Depending on what the signature analysis showed, potentially forgery. He said these things the way a doctor names a diagnosis. Precisely. Without flinching. I wrote them down. I want to be honest about how I felt during this period. I did not feel powerful. I did not feel like I was winning anything. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been grieving and simultaneously building a case, which are 2 things that should not have to happen at the same time but sometimes do. I missed my mother. I thought about her a lot during those weeks. Not the sick version, not the end. I thought about her at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings. I thought about the way she laughed at things she found genuinely funny, which was always slightly delayed, like the joke had to travel some distance to reach her. I thought about her writing that note in the margin of her planner, underlining it twice, writing his phone number beneath it like a lifeline she was leaving for herself. She had been afraid. She had been sick and tired and in pain, and she had still been afraid. That was what I held on to when the process felt slow or pointless or overwhelming. Not anger. Not revenge. Just the memory of her handwriting on that page. Small and cramped and underlined twice. Gerald moved carefully and deliberately. The first thing he did was file a formal challenge to the revised will. He flagged the irregular notarization to the State Bar, which opened a separate inquiry into the law office that had filed it. The second thing he did was commission a forensic handwriting analysis on the contact authorization form. He used a firm that had worked with courts in the state before. Credentialed. Documented. The kind of analysis that holds up. The results came back in 11 days. The signature on the authorization form was not my mother's. The forensic analyst's report was 7 pages long and used technical language I had to read slowly to understand. But the conclusion was clear. The pressure patterns were inconsistent. The letter formation didn't match samples taken from documents my mother had signed over the prior decade. The fluidity was wrong for someone with her documented level of arthritis. Gerald read the report twice before calling me. He said, "We have what we need to move forward." I asked him what that meant practically. He said it meant he was contacting the district attorney's office. The Adult Protective Services investigator was a woman I will call R. She was professional and unhurried. She came to my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon and sat at my kitchen table and listened to everything I told her without interrupting. She asked careful questions. She took notes on a legal pad with a pen she clicked before she wrote anything. She asked me if I had all of the documentation I had described. I told her I had copies. Multiple copies. Stored in different locations. She nodded like that was the right answer. She said she would be opening a formal investigation. She said that because my mother had passed, the focus would be on what had occurred during her final months, the financial decisions, the authorization changes, the will revision. She said they would be requesting records from the hospice facility, from the law office that filed the revision, and from my mother's bank. She asked me if I knew whether any accounts had been accessed or altered. I told her I didn't know for certain. She said they would find out. Before she left, she paused at my door. She said, "You did the right thing documenting everything before you said anything to anyone." I thanked her. She said it mattered more than people realized. She said most cases like this fell apart because someone confronted the person too early and gave them time to destroy things or construct a story. I thought about the planner. About how quickly it had disappeared from that room. I thought about how close I had come to saying something at the funeral. To pulling my aunt aside in the parking lot and telling her I knew. To letting my face show what I was thinking every time I looked at her across the room that day. I had wanted to. Several times. I hadn't. During all of this, my aunt called me regularly. She left voicemails. Warm ones. She said she was thinking of me. She said grief was hard and she hoped I was eating and sleeping. She said we should have dinner soon, that my mother would have wanted us to stay close. I listened to every one of those messages. I did not return a single call. She didn't know what I had done. She didn't know about Gerald. She didn't know about R. She didn't know about the handwriting analysis sitting in a folder on Gerald's desk or the formal complaint filed with the State Bar or the investigator who had already requested 3 years of my mother's bank records. She thought the silence from me was grief. She thought she had handled everything cleanly. She thought the planner was gone. She thought the will revision would hold. She thought the story was over. 2 months after my mother died, my aunt filed paperwork to begin the transfer of the house into her name. Gerald had anticipated this. He had already filed the challenge. The transfer was flagged immediately and frozen pending the estate litigation. She called me the day she found out. The warmth in her voice was gone. She said there must be some mistake. She said she didn't understand what was happening. She asked me if I had done something. I let her talk. When she finished, I said, "I think you should call a lawyer." Then I ended the call. The bank records came in the following week. R called me to tell me what they had found. In the final 10 weeks of my mother's life, 4 transfers had been made from my mother's savings account. Small enough not to trigger automatic flags. Large enough, added together, to matter. Each transfer had gone to an account in my aunt's name. My mother had never used online banking in her life. She had told me that herself. She said she didn't trust it. She paid bills by check and kept her statements in a folder in her desk drawer. Someone had registered her for online banking access. Someone had used it 4 times. R said they were escalating the matter. She said the district attorney's office had been formally briefed. She said, "This is now a criminal investigation." They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The call from Gerald came on a Thursday morning. He said the district attorney's office had filed charges. He listed them the way he listed everything. Quietly. In order. Elder financial abuse. Forgery of a legal document. Fraud in the execution of a will. Unauthorized access to financial accounts. 4 charges. I wrote them down even though I didn't need to. It was something to do with my hands. He said there would be an arraignment within the week. He said my aunt had retained a criminal defense attorney. He said I should expect things to move slowly from here, the way legal proceedings do, and that I should prepare myself for that. I told him I understood. He said one more thing before he hung up. He said, "Your mother kept good records. That helped more than you know." I thought about the burgundy planner. About the years before that one, a different color each time. About a woman who had kept her life organized in small handwritten notebooks for as long as I could remember. She had always said that writing things down was how you proved they were real. The arraignment was on a Tuesday. I did not go. Gerald told me I didn't have to. He said it would be procedural. He said she would enter a plea and a court date would be set, and there was nothing there that required my presence. I stayed home. I made coffee. I sat by the window. I watched the street outside, which was quiet in the way that weekday mornings are quiet. People walking dogs. A delivery truck double parked. Ordinary things. My aunt pleaded not guilty. I had expected that. What I had not expected was the law office. The small firm that had filed the revised will, the one with the irregular notarization, the state bar investigation had moved faster than any of us anticipated. Within 6 weeks of the formal complaint, the attorney who had filed the documents surrendered his license. Gerald explained it to me on the phone. He said the notary whose stamp had been used on the documents had no record of ever meeting my mother. No record of any appointment. No record of any notarization on that date. Someone had used the stamp without authorization. The attorney, faced with his own exposure, had cooperated with investigators. He said my aunt had come to him. He said she had told him my mother was of sound mind and had wanted the changes made but couldn't travel to the office herself. He said she had brought a woman she introduced as my mother to sign the documents. It had not been my mother. I sat with that for a long time after Gerald told me. Someone had sat in an attorney's office and signed my mother's name. Someone had looked a lawyer in the face and pretended to be a dying woman. I didn't say anything about it to anyone. Not because I wasn't affected by it, but because there was nothing useful to say. The investigation would say it more clearly than I ever could. The civil case moved alongside the criminal one. Gerald had filed to have the revised will declared void. Given the forensic evidence, the surrendered law license, and the cooperating attorney, the court agreed within 4 months. The original will was reinstated. The house remained in the estate. The 4 transfers from my mother's account, the ones made through the online banking portal she had never used, totaled a little over $31,000. A civil judgment was entered requiring my aunt to return every dollar. She didn't have it liquid. She had spent a portion of it. The judgment attached to her assets. It would follow her. Gerald explained all of this to me in his office on a grey afternoon in late autumn. He had a folder open on the desk between us. He went through each item methodically, the way he did everything. When he finished, he closed the folder. He said, "The estate is intact. The house is yours when probate closes." I nodded. He said, "I'm sorry this is how you had to spend your first year without her." I didn't have anything to say to that. So I just nodded again. The criminal case took longer. These things always do. My aunt's attorney negotiated. There were hearings I didn't attend. There were months where nothing seemed to be happening and then months where several things happened at once and Gerald would call to update me and I would write it all down and then sit quietly afterward. In the end, she did not go to trial. She accepted a plea agreement. 2 of the 4 charges were reduced. She was convicted on elder financial abuse and document fraud. She received 3 years of supervised probation. Mandatory restitution. A permanent record. No prison time. I want to be honest about how I felt when Gerald told me that. I had not expected prison. I had understood from early on that elder financial abuse cases, even well-documented ones, often resolved this way. Gerald had prepared me for it. He had told me the realistic range of outcomes, and I had listened and adjusted my expectations accordingly. But there was still a moment, sitting in my car after that phone call, when I felt the gap between what had happened and what I wanted to have happened. She had sat in a lawyer's office and pretended to be my mother. She had done that. And she would spend her evenings at home, checking in with a probation officer once a month. I sat with that feeling and I let it be what it was. And then I let it go. Not because I had forgiven her. I hadn't. I don't know if I ever will. But because holding on to that gap, measuring it over and over, would not change anything. It would only cost me time I didn't want to spend that way. My mother had not been a person who held on to things. She had been a person who wrote things down, dealt with them practically, and then moved forward. I was trying to do the same. The house closed in the spring. I spent 2 weeks there before I made any decisions about it. I wanted to be inside it first. To walk through the rooms. To understand what I wanted to do. My mother's desk was still in the small room off the kitchen that she had called her office, though it had really just been a room with a desk and a window that looked out onto the back garden. In the bottom drawer, I found her files. Organized by year. Statements and documents going back nearly 2 decades. And next to the files, a small stack of planners. 7 of them. Different colors. Going back 7 years. I had not known she kept the old ones. I sat down on the floor of that small room and I went through them slowly. Not looking for evidence. Not looking for anything specific. Just reading. Her handwriting in the early ones was looser, easier. Her handwriting in the later ones was smaller, more careful. The arthritis had changed the way she held the pen. But the notes were the same. Appointments. Phone numbers. Small reminders. And in the margins, occasionally, something personal. A line about something she had seen on a walk. A note about a book she wanted to read. A reminder to call someone she had been thinking about. In the planner from 3 years before she got sick, in the margin of a Wednesday in February, she had written my name. Just my name. And under it, in smaller letters, doing well. Proud. I don't know what she had been thinking about when she wrote it. I don't know if it was about something specific or just a general feeling she had wanted to record. But she had written it down. Because writing things down was how she proved they were real. I kept the planners. All 7 of them. I put them on the shelf in what was now my house, in the small room off the kitchen, next to the window that looks out onto the garden. I didn't make any dramatic decisions after everything was resolved. I didn't change my life in any large way. I planted something in the back garden that spring. My mother had always kept it up, but it had gone a little wild in the months the house had sat empty. I spent a weekend clearing it out. Getting it back to what it had been. It was ordinary work. Quiet work. The kind that doesn't ask anything of you except to show up and pay attention. My aunt and I have not spoken since the phone call where I told her to get a lawyer. I don't expect we will. I don't have anything to say to her, and I suspect, now, she has learned to be careful about what she says to me. That is enough. I think about what would have happened if I had said something at the funeral. If I had pulled her aside in the parking lot, the way I had wanted to. If I had let her see on my face what I was already beginning to understand. She would have had time. The planner would have been burned, not just taken. The online banking would have been wiped. The attorney would have been coached. The money would have moved somewhere harder to find. Everything I had built would have collapsed before it was finished. Grief makes people want to say things out loud. It makes people want the person in front of them to know what they know. To see them be seen. To have the moment feel like something. I understand that impulse. I chose differently. Not because I was certain it would work. But because my mother deserved more than a parking lot argument that resolved nothing. She deserved the full accounting. The documents. The investigation. The court record. The formal judgment. The permanent record of what had been done to her. That is what she got. That is what I gave her. That night, everything was quiet.